The new Netflix Frankenstein is a bad adaptation of Mary Shelley's book, but it's still a good movie. Let me explain. Hi guys and welcome to Fandom Newbie. My name is Shruti and in today's video, we're going to be deep diving into Frankenstein, the movie, the new one by Guillermo del Toro, as well as Mary Shelley's book because for the past week or so, Frankenstein has literally been my entire personality. I've gone down a Frankenstein rabbit hole, and so I'm creating this video because I think you guys will find it interesting as well. So let's get started. Guillermo del Toro, who is the director of the new Netflix Frankenstein movie, I think is a master when it comes to adapting or like just making anything with a good gothic theme. He understands the gothic aesthetic. He understands what gothic cinema or like gothic fiction really means, and he brings it to life in the most stunning way. I think when it comes to gothic textures, he did a fantastic job in Crimson Peak, and he does the same in Frankenstein. When it comes to the art direction, Guillermo del Toro is just fabulous, and Frankenstein is visually stunning. Like there is one scene where the creature is standing on ice against like a sunset or a sunrise type of situation, and like that could be a wallpaper or that could be a painting. Every single frame of this movie is so visually stunning. The way that he uses light, especially like natural light, so light which comes from lightning, the way that he uses even like fabrics of the clothes to sort of bring out certain aspects of characters. For example, Victor's mom has these very like free flowing gowns, which I think is supposed to also impart a sort of angelic quality to her character because she's such a strong epitome of good in Victor Frankenstein's childhood. So like everything when it comes to the art direction and the costumes, I feel like has meaning, and it really brings out this atmospheric gothic quality. And so when it comes to like the way the film looks, the script, the acting, like I have absolutely no complaints. It was a 2.5 hour movie and it didn't feel like a 2.5 hour movie to me. Like I was quite engaged throughout the movie. And now let's come to the themes of the movie. I think the main thing that Del Toro is asking us to think about when watching this movie is what makes us human and what gives us our humanity. Is it our appearance? Is it our intelligence? Is it our capacity to feel, our emotional intelligence? Is it about being compassionate? Is it about being connected to community and other human beings? Is it our capacity to have a spoken language? What is it that makes us human? Because what's interesting is that you have one character who exhibits all of these signs of like external intelligence and motivation and drive, but you see him becoming more and more isolated and driven by madness. Whereas you have one who on the outside doesn't look very human, but you see him longing for connection and emotional depth and just like the need to be accepted. And so through these two characters, essentially the main question is what makes us human and who is the real monster and who is the real victim. And don't get me wrong, this theme is very much there in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but Del Toro has introduced some specific changes to his film that make the reasons for this theme, like the context of this theme, very, very, very different. And that is what I want to get into because this basically makes it an unfaithful adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin was born into radicalism. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, was one of the most staunch feminist icons of her era, and she wrote the book A Vindication of the Rights of Women, which is still considered one of the best feminist texts ever. And her father, William Godwin, was a philosopher and political radical who believed in the power of reason. And right from the outset, Mary had a pretty tragic life. Her mother died about like 10 days after Mary was born, and it was because the physician who delivered Mary, while treating her mother, forgot to wash his hands And her mother essentially got septicemia, like she got infected because of his unclean hands, and she died. And so Mary, throughout her life, basically lived with that grief of never knowing her mother. And she carried that grief with her into adolescence and adulthood. And you can very well see that grief seep into her book, Frankenstein. Now, Mary grew up with her father, and because he was such a progressive person for that age, she ended up having an extremely unique childhood where she was brought up highly educated in various subjects, including language, philosophy, politics, and poetry. And at 16 years old, she fell in love with Percy Shelley, who was like a strong admirer of her father's, but he was also a pretty renowned poet for that time. And the scandal was that Percy was already married and essentially having an affair with Mary. But they're still running around together. Mary gets pregnant, and at 17 years old, she gives birth to a daughter who is premature and basically dies after childbirth. This is what Mary wrote in her journal during that time. Dreamed that my little baby came to life again, that it had only been cold, and that we rubbed it before the fire and it lived. Again, this grief of losing her daughter, of wanting her to come back to life, would find its way into the book that she wrote, which was Frankenstein. But apart from the emotional turmoil that was going on in Mary's life, there were other influences to Frankenstein. And it specifically had to do with the time in which Mary Shelley lived, which was during the Industrial Revolution. The world was changing at a terrifying pace. Factories and machines and industries were being built that were billowing black plumes of smoke into the air. And people were genuinely worried about the impact that these machines would have on their life and on humanity in general. And that brings us to the summer of 1816, where Mary and Percy Shelley, along with Mary's stepsister Claire and another extremely renowned poet of that time, Lord Byron, and his physician friend, the five of them are basically stuck in Byron's villa in Geneva. And it was a year where apparently there was like some sort of volcanic eruption which happened in Indonesia that resulted in storms throughout Europe. So essentially, these five young people who have fantastical ideas and just are brimming with creativity and potential, they found themselves cooped up in this villa near a lake, and they're having all sorts of amazing conversations about science, about progress, about poetry. And to keep things interesting and exciting, Lord Byron proposes a competition of sorts where each of these people has to write a ghost story. And Mary, 18-year-old Mary, who has had to live through the grief of losing her mother, the grief of losing her child, who's lived through an era that sees so much progress and change and is surrounded by such intellectual and just intellectually stimulating people and conversations. She, at that point in time, wrote Frankenstein. The book was published in 1818, and it was one of the first science fiction books to have ever been written and published. Initially, it was published under Percy Shelley's name because women weren't like supposed to be authors and definitely weren't supposed to write such a radical work of fiction. It just wouldn't have been possible. And Mary was legitimately afraid that if people knew that she wrote it, they might take away her children, because by this time, she and Percy were married and they had a couple of kids. And so because of that, it was initially published under Percy's name, but later on, it was known that Mary Shelley was the author of Frankenstein. So now that we have that background, we understand the emotions that Mary Shelley put into this book. Let's talk about what the themes of Frankenstein are. Now, if you guys don't know, essentially the plot of Frankenstein is that it follows a young scientist named Victor Frankenstein who becomes single-mindedly obsessed with the idea of conquering death. And in doing so, he basically builds a monster out of like dead tissue and organs, and he brings that creature to life. But the moment the creature is brought to life, Victor Frankenstein basically feels horrified by what he has done and he abandons the monster. After which he has to face the horrific consequences of creating this monster and essentially abandoning it. So, at its core, Frankenstein is a cautionary tale that is warning us of the dangers of arrogant, ambitious scientific progress without any ethical or moral considerations. Victor never stops to ask himself whether he should create life, and he never takes accountability or any responsibility for that creation once it has been made. And he only does it because he is driven, like I said, by that single minded obsession of that sort of scientific advancement. He is basically playing God without thinking of any of the consequences, even after the creation is causing a lot of devastation for Victor Frankenstein himself. He still doesn't take responsibility. And that is basically what the main message of Frankenstein is that man's ambition, man's arrogance, that they can conquer anything, man's hubris is basically extremely dangerous and needs to be checked. So that's Victor's part of the story. The creature story is also interesting because the creature starts out as innocent, but because the people and society are unable to accept him because of how he looks, essentially, he then becomes malicious and evil and starts wreaking havoc. And the thing is that he very meticulously and knowingly does the things he does in the book because he is seeking revenge. And he says it also in the book, which is that I am malicious because I am miserable. He is lonely, he is isolated, he feels completely rejected by humanity. And it is that which causes him to become what he does in the book. And so in the book, you have both of these like morally gray, flawed characters who are both victim and perpetrator. And so the lines of who is the monster and who is not are slightly more blurred in the book than they are in the movie. And that's what I think makes the book so interesting. And now let's come back to the movie and why I think it is a completely different story that Del Toro is trying to tell. I've kept it quite vague until this point, but from now onwards, I'm going to go into deep spoilers. So if you haven't watched the movie, you can click away and come back after you watched it. What the movie shows is that Victor Frankenstein's father was quite abusive towards him. And essentially the story that I think Del Toro is trying to say is how the cycles of generational trauma kind of repeat themselves. So you have Victor's father who abused him, and that's why Victor cannot become a good father figure to the creature because he's never had a good father figure, and he essentially repeats the same trauma that his father inflicted on him on the creature, and that basically causes the creature to feel abandoned, run away, and then he has to face the consequences. That to me was the main message of the movie. And then it also gave Victor Frankenstein a reason to conquer death because his mother, who is like the most angelic part of his childhood, is like taken away from him because of death. And he feels like his father didn't save her. And so basically he blames his father for everything and he wants to become like a better physician or surgeon, and he wants to become a better scientist than his father, and he wants to conquer death because he's not over the grief of losing his mother. And so it gives him that tragic backstory of like a damaged childhood. And that is what causes him to be who he is. And so to me, that, like I said, that is the story that Del Toro is saying about generational trauma cycles and what that does to us as human beings. The reason why I think, like, while this is interesting to explore, why this is great, why it's completely different from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is because in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein actually comes from an extremely loving family. He comes from, his father is one of the best fathers ever, and he also has a very devoted partner. But despite all of that, despite coming from a good family, a good home, with a lot of wealth and privilege, despite that, it is his own arrogance, his own ambition, his own hubris, that is what causes his downfall. It's not because he has some sort of trauma that causes him to behave this way. And so that's why I feel like they're two completely different stories that Mary Shelley is trying to tell and that Del Toro is trying to tell. And that's okay, I guess. But Del Toro's Frankenstein is not Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Completely different stories, completely different themes. Also, let's come to the creature story. In Del Toro's Frankenstein, the creature basically inflicts whatever deaths he causes, they're either by accident or like he doesn't mean to do it. Whereas in the book, like I mentioned, he very knowingly kills every single person who Victor Frankenstein is close to. He kills them meticulously, and he kills them to inflict pain to Victor Frankenstein. And so because of that, like I said, it blurs the lines of like good and evil even more in the book, which is why I think the book is a lot more morally complex and the film is a bit more morally simple to understand and deconstruct. Again, two very different stories that I think they are trying to tell, but I feel like the book is richer in that sense as compared to the movie. I think because the book just has so much of Mary Shelley's personal experience and just her like entire life kind of poured into it, it just makes it a much richer experience. But Del Toro's movie, I think, brings the world to life in a fantastic way. Like I said, it's visually stunning, great acting, great script, but it's not Frankenstein. It's a completely different story. It's a completely different look at the same characters, the same sort of like themes, but very, very different motivation as compared to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So yeah, that was my analysis. I know this video is extremely long, so I hope you guys have stuck around till the end. But like I said, I am obsessed. I am obsessed with this story. I'm obsessed with the adaptation as well. It's really, really interesting to analyze the way that different creators look at themes and what they bring to the story. So, like I said in the beginning, Del Toro's Frankenstein is not bad. It's just not Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It is a bad adaptation of the book, but it's not a bad movie. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Let me know what you thought of the movie if you watched it. I haven't watched any other Frankenstein adaptations, and I think I'll watch all of them now just to see like how other creators have sort of adapted this. But yeah, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.